everybody, I'm Matt Anderson and welcome to The Road Not Taken, how ordinary people got out of their own way and you can too. I'm excited to introduce our guest today, Dain Rasmussen. And Dain, if you'd just like to say a few words about yourself to introduce yourself to our audience, that would be much appreciated.
Absolutely. So my name is Dain Rasmussen. I'm the head of sales for a company called Inspirato based out of downtown Denver. I grew up from extremely humble beginnings, one of 7 kids in eastern Colorado. Single mom, raised all of us. Most of the times that meant we just raised ourselves. I worked as a well driller as I put myself through college, and now I run an 80-person sales organization for the best private vacation club in the world called Inspirato.
And Dain says that my wife and I can vouch. We are actually members of this, so it's kind of one network I tapped into, and so Dain, thanks a lot for coming on the show. I always like to kick things off with one specific question, and it starts with kind of the theme around getting out of your own way, and certainly you weren't born with a silver spoon in your mouth. Right. What's helped you most in terms of overcoming adversity?
I think what's helped me most is I had to grow up very quickly at a young age. And outside of the usual hard work and creativity, I think one of the things that set me apart at a young age was my ability to read people to a point where I could understand their underlying motivations and, in a way, help them accomplish what they were trying to accomplish and, in turn, get them to help me. It's interesting, but I use that every day today to my advantage, and I've done that basically my entire life.
I want to ask where you learned that.
That's a great question. I think it was out of just survival. Honestly, it was probably some type of defense mechanism that I had. I was being one of 7 kids. I was the smallest of my brothers. There was 5 boys and 2 girls. And I realized at a young age that being the smallest out of 5, I wasn't going to win any sort of physical altercation. And it was martial law growing up. It was who was the strongest and there was power struggles all the time. And I learned from a young age that I could do a lot more damage or help a lot more based off of what I could say. And it really mattered who I was saying it to. So it was first probably built out of survival, but it's really, served me well through my life.
You said you had a team of 80 people. I'm curious, are you able to train others on some of this?
I believe many of the strategies that we've employed as a sales organization are the things that I was testing 10 years ago, 12 years ago when I first started, as a salesperson in this industry. So much of our entire strategy is the foundation of it is built off of the things that I learned on my own. And sales was the perfect, I didn't realize at the time, but sales was such a good, challenging opportunity for me because it allowed for me to thrive in chaos. That's what I always felt. I felt like I thrived in chaos. And so I helped create a lot of the foundation for the team. That said, I've hired an amazing group of sales leaders around me that have been able to expand upon some of the principles that have helped me over the years. So yes, absolutely. I have a new hire training happening later on today. I'm very involved in the training program here.
Can you give us an example of something you learned 10, 12 years ago, or even just, growing up that's part of that foundation of sales training?
Yeah. So are you saying as it relates to my childhood, or are you saying as it relates to early stages as a salesperson?
I'm not sure. Really, actually more specifically, in terms of helping people read others to help them accomplish what they want. That piece to it.
Right. One of the things that I have always prided myself on is what we call territory development. You live in Chicago, is that right?
That's right, yeah.
Chicago. And so, there's always a debate, and this debate will go on for eternity, which is, are you better off as a sales organization having salespeople that live in that region? Are you better off having them live in a more centralized location and have them travel into the region? Now, I couldn't live in the territories that I covered. And so I felt like I had to be just as effective at that part of the job while also being effective at being in the Denver home office. And so when it comes to how I've learned how to read people, it came out of learning that it was so much more effective when you can sit down in somebody's office and see what they're passionate about. I'll just give you one example real fast. So I'm looking at you. Behind you, you have pictures of the things that you love and the places that you love. Mm-hmm. Those are things that you can't see over the phone. You can't see it. You don't know that. You learn so much more about somebody if you can see them in their own environment. And so I found that oftentimes meeting somebody where they lived or their place of work, and oftentimes if you met somebody at their house, you would know much of the information that you needed to know from the minute you stepped foot in that house, being super perceptive to everything that's in your surroundings. I'll give you an example. Is your significant other there? Are your kids there? Are they going to be a part of the decision? I've done sales meetings where, I've actually had dinner with families as I'm selling things to them. Mm-hmm. And so it gives you a really good understanding of how people make decisions.
Wait a sec. So you're saying some different things here. You're saying not only learning about what's important to them based on what's in their environment, but also how they make decisions. You mean based on who they have or who a family might have at the meeting? Is that what you mean?
That's exactly right.
Yeah.
I'll explain. So one of the main ways that we sell, one of the quotes that I try to get my salespeople to think about all the time is a quote that I say. It's called "Sell with your heart." And there's many podcasts and things that you can watch that talk about the why. I think Simon Sinek actually did that. He spoke to how brands do that. And the reason that most people decide to join Inspirato isn't because it's just a better way to vacation. It's because they want to spend time with the people that they love most. And if you can't find the underlying, who do they love? Who do they want to connect with? What are they lacking in their life with their personal relationships? That's what I mean when I'm talking about how you read somebody. That's what I learned early on. If I could find out what somebody loved, what they were hoping to accomplish most, I could had a much better chance of selling them or training them.
It's interesting because so often when I've heard people talk about meeting people in their office, it can come across as sort of a cheesy sales strategy to sort of say, oh, you like golf, or something like that. Rather, it's like a technique. But you're taking this much more deeply to pay it attention, say, okay, this is something that presumably is really important to this person, and to honor that more in terms of who they are. And as you say, what matters to them, what do they value, and use that. And then how do you weave that into the meetings themselves? Yeah.
So the other term I use a lot of terms around love and heart. And I always talk about how you have to get to the heart of the matter. So you have to ask questions that are emotionally engaging. It's not easy for people to do that at first, especially salespeople. I think it's hard for them to get in uncomfortable situations. But in order to figure out what really drives somebody, you have to do that. You have to ask questions about, them emotionally. Why is this going to be important for them emotionally? People make decisions more on emotions than they do on logic. So if I was going to ask a question about golf, oh, you hit the links lately. Hey, how you swinging that 9-iron? That has zero emotion. That has nothing to do with why the person wanted to have a meeting with me that day. Mm-hmm. Deeper than that.
So you're saying you talk to them more about how they got engaged with golf and what they like about it?
Or how they got engaged to their wife.
Yeah.
Or what they think about time with their kids. Or the time that they want to spend with their parents before it's too late. Those types of things. We all have the same limitation. It's called time. Mm-hmm. The question is when you get to a certain point in life, money becomes less important, time becomes more important. It switches at some point in your life for at least the most of the developed world. Mm-hmm. For many parts of the world, that doesn't switch. Money is important. Experiences come second. But in our era and where we live and what we do today, time is less important than money when you get to a certain age.
You mean time is more important than money?
Sorry, time is more important than money.
And then in terms of reading people, so that I love that content, by the way. I mean, ask more emotionally engaging questions, and you're right, that takes more courage. Actually, maybe I'll stay on that for a second. So if you're training someone new, how do you give them the confidence to be courageous enough to ask those more engaging questions?
I oftentimes talk about, I think people oftentimes when they come in and they're beginning to learn how to sell, or they're beginning to try to accomplish anything, they're looking for, what are the 2 or 3 things that you can, what are the words that you can link together that are going to get you there? How do I say this perfectly that someone's going to be excited about it? And I talk more about the approach than I talk about the actual terminology and the language that they use. And so oftentimes it's in a response to some form of, how am I going to be successful? How am I going to be good at this? And it's, we hire a lot of times people that this is their first or second job out of college, and they're selling this, and they're trying to connect with somebody who's in their late 40s, early 50s. And so that's where it's a little bit strange as well. The person that they're selling to is more likely a parent figure than a friend figure. It's much easier when you're on a friend-to-friend level, but you need to get to that level. So it's really just it's a strategy that has to happen if they want to be successful. And I guess I said it differently. If you haven't mastered it, you're not gonna be effective doing this job.
So help me out a little bit here. You talked about, so it's the approach that matters. So what about the approach that builds that credibility from someone who might be, let's say, in their 20s, and yet their prospect is somebody who's twice their age potentially?
Mm-hmm. I think if you can engage somebody with powerful questions, that's where the trust begins. So one of the people that I follow closely as a sales leader is a gentleman named Jeffrey Gitmer.
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm.
And he talks a lot about what types of questions are you asking? Are you asking the boring question that everybody asks them? Are you asking questions to get them to think? And so it's more about that. And also, I find that like now that I have kids, I have 10, 8, and 5-year-old, many of the things that I do, many of the purchasing decisions that I make are really to make them happy and to spend more time with them. And so they can find a way to relate to them as almost like the smart person that understands technology first. Like, this is a trend that's happening that you should get on board with because your kids are going to love this. And so it's an interesting strategy based off of that age gap and that difference oftentimes. And that's not always the case. We do have we have different demographics that sell, but that's what we're trying to accomplish most times. Does that help?
Yes, it does. I mean, but basically what I'm taking, in the short, is if to be more effective at, I guess to be better at sales, it's about asking better questions, more powerful, let's say more emotionally engaging questions that you say that get people to think, rather than perhaps the predictable expected ones where then people treat you as business as usual, so therefore they're less likely to do business with you, and they're certainly less likely to recommend you or ever speak particularly, that enthusiastically about you. So I want to go back just to your background in some ways, because it's, for those that haven't already picked up, so Inspirato serves, the demographic that's your average client. Actually I know this, right? So I don't want to be disingenuous about it. I'm told anyway, typically has a home that's worth $1 million or more. Is that about right? Or does it depend where they live?
That's probably right. The way I like to describe it is that if you can afford buying a condo somewhere, or if you can, if you've bought any type of recreational investment, you can join our club. Mm-hmm. Go ahead.
So where I'm going with this, and this now to make this relevant to everybody listening, in terms of, I suppose, what some people would just call prospecting up the food chain, but also about feeling like you belong there. Mm-hmm. Dain, you talked a little bit about your upbringing, being one of 7, raised by your mother, very humble origins, grew up quickly. One of the things I run into for most people is this, what some people call the imposter syndrome. In other words, feeling like, how did you feel comfortable then? Now your prospects are people that are pretty affluent. Some are extremely affluent. That's absolutely not your background. So how did you I guess, how do you combat that, or how did you combat it? I don't want to make assumptions that you still have to deal with it, but feeling like you somehow not belong in the same room in a worthiness standpoint, but just that you can rub shoulders with them and be the authority in how you can be helpful to them.
Yeah. So I think what oftentimes we sell to self-made successful people, generally speaking. Usually our members are the wealthiest or wealthier person in their family or in their social group. And so if you can relate to somebody about the challenges that you've had growing up and where you've come from, and this is really important, how valuable it is to be able to give back to the people that helped you along the way. A lot of times that's family, a lot of times that's friends, in a way where you're giving back by spending more time with them, by being a member of a club like Inspirato. Mm-hmm. We create the backdrop for them to pay back, or we call it generosity of spirit, to be generous with what you've been able to accomplish, and not just giving $5, $10, $20,000 away to a charity, but actually investing and spending time with the people that they care about most. And I think if you approach it from that standpoint, Inspirato doesn't seem like something that only wealthy people can do. Mm-hmm. It seems like a better alternative for ways to give back to the people that you care about most, because experiences at the end of the day are more valuable than material items. They're more valuable. You look back on the experiences that you've had, and they become more valuable over time. That really nice car, that really nice watch that you have, that just becomes normal. It just becomes the car that you drive after a while. And so I think if you set it in that light, when you're talking with successful individuals, they get that. They understand that they did come from somewhere other than where they're at. And they do want to give back to the people that they care about most. They do want to spend time with their family.
It's interesting. So are you almost saying that many of the clients of your company are not people who inherited their money?
In the many years of doing this business, it feels like to me that that's more the exception than the norm. And I think that in general, it's what people think normally when somebody has money, is that they inherited it, that they didn't work for it. I think it's actually, what do you call it? It's like it's a stereotype. Mm-hmm. Most wealthy people that I've met have made that money themselves. They haven't been given that money. So I try not to approach those situations thinking that, because in my experience, I mean, I've probably talked to hundreds of thousands, maybe not at least tens of thousands of people about how they're going to spend money. And oftentimes it starts with, well, how did you make that money? Very rare that I come across somebody that says, you know what, I just rolled out of bed and I had, $1 million in my bank account. It just usually doesn't happen that way. So
I think that's absolutely fascinating that's probably a mindset shift, I suspect, for many middle-class people, or, people not from, that grew up with affluence, just to hear in a way, because as you say, it's an easy stereotype, because then it's something that therefore makes it unattainable for the rest of us, and therefore, not worth trying or pursuing. So I find that fascinating. In other words, there's a mindset shift that I think many of us could reconsider there, that might make it easier for us to be more affluent. One of the things I want to come back, though, again, from a practical standpoint for everybody listening, is regardless of who your target ideal client is, what I'm taking from this is understanding the core, what those people value, what your ideal client values, and understanding that better from an emotional standpoint, because that's perhaps how they'll make their decisions, but being able to communicate in those terms, because it sounds like that's what you've done with the demographic that you target with Inspirato. Mm-hmm. But I also do want to ask you just a bit more about the experiences piece, somewhat from ignorance in a way, but you said experiences are more valuable than material items. I mean, for how many people is that true? Well, I guess on one level that might be new to some people to hear that, because most people might just assume from what we see in magazines that people value the cars, the jewelry, the clothes, the houses, and so on. So can you talk a bit more about, I guess, I don't know, that topic?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's multiple articles that are written about it. But I think I try to always fast forward to the end of, end of my time, when my time comes. And I try to envision what are the things that I would be most proud of in my life. And I think a lot of people, realize over time that that what you've really the memories that you've created with the people that you care about most are the things that you'll always gain value from. I don't know how. It's interesting how I fell in this industry, but some of the stories I've heard from the members that have traveled and who they've spent time with, a lot of it has come from those conversations as well. But again, I kind of go back to you. I mean, when you think about all the things that you purchased and all the things done at the end of a year, do you always think back, oh man, it was so awesome that I bought that new material item back in June? Or do you think back, God, that was a great trip. You have all those pictures and all those memories, and you talk about the things that you did. It brings a smile to your face. After a while, the things that you purchase out of material just don't have that same type of effect. So I don't know. I don't know where that comes from, other than maybe seeing it real life forever.
I think it'd be a funny panel to have someone that sells sort of high-end jewelry and I don't know, high-end property for that matter, just to sort of put everyone on a panel to just sort of see kind of where they, their experiences align and don't. But regardless, it's not necessarily relevant to our conversation today. But so you're saying that, in other words, feeling like you belonged when you talk to people. I just want to kind of draw that out completely. You talked about being able, if you can relate to the challenges they had. You're also saying that some of the self-made people can see in you what they've experienced themselves. So in other words, they kind of accept you as one of their own because of how you're wired. I mean, is that also accurate at all?
That is accurate. And again, it's because a lot of times when you approach somebody and you show them the pictures of our properties, I mean, we have multi-million-dollar homes at the best resorts all over the world. And so it seems magical. Inspirato seems magical. It seems like it's unattainable. It seems like it's too luxurious. And I think we're better off explaining in plain terms what it actually means. I don't know if that answers the question the right way, but coming from a humble background, it helps them understand that they can come from a humble background as well and still enjoy those things. You don't have to be somebody who jet sets around the world and flies privately or first class everywhere to value getting a house and spending time together. That's not an Airbnb. That's not a VRBO. It's not some roll of the dice. And I use those terms specifically because there are a lot of people that try to accomplish this on their own, and they mess up. They try to save money on booking a nice place to go with their family, and then they show up, and the anticipation is fear. They're anticipating a disaster. They don't know what they're going to get when they show up. And there's many studies out there that talk about a part of the enjoyment of the vacation is just simply booking it. Part of the enjoyment of the vacation is looking forward to it and planning it. Part of the enjoyment of vacation is actually being on the trip, and then part of the vacation of enjoyment is after you leave and reminiscing about the times that you had. And so again, if it's valuable to somebody who's had a little bit had to work hard in their life. That's valuable. That to them is more valuable than rolling the dice, booking something online, or buying some other thing that doesn't have that same type of assurance.
So there's a certainty element to it as well, right? That you're helping people with?
Certainty and it's mindlessness. Oftentimes people try to book their own vacations and plan their own things online, and what happens oftentimes is that it causes internal struggle between couples. Who's responsible for this? Who's going to go to the grocery store for that? Who's in charge of planning the excursions? And what ought to be a fun time and an enjoyable vacation, something goes wrong. I don't know, how long have you been married, Matt?
8 years almost.
You know that look. when you planned something and it didn't go the way you hoped it was going to be, and it's on you,
Mm-hmm.
you're on vacation, and you ought to be having the best time of your life, and you're not. It's the worst feeling in the world. So we try to prevent that from happening, and that mindlessness comes from there's going to be a car at the airport to pick you up. The concierge is going to make sure the food's in stock in the house. It's logistics. It's more logistics than it is because if the logistics are handled around a vacation, the enjoyment can go through the roof. Once the logistics break down, who knows?
Yeah.
Someone's mad at somebody else.
Well, what I also take from this, just to extrapolate for people in completely different industries and businesses, I wrote down the word certainty, but what certainty can we, do a better job of communicating that people are going to get from doing business with us? But then also, it's funny, you use the word mindlessness, which, on one level can have negative connotations. But the minute you said it, I thought of someone I interviewed last week who's absolutely at the top in sales. And she talked about the number of coaches that she's worked with and how, the personal trainer helps in the sense of, amongst many things, of she doesn't have to think about what she's going to do when she gets to the gym. She knows she's going to get an outstanding workout, and it's one way she doesn't have to tax her mind because it's going to get plenty of taxing when she gets to the office. Mm-hmm. And so it's that concept of how, our brains only have so much energy in the day, and we don't need it to get sucked up with things like you talked about, use the word logistics. So it's almost like, again, for those listening, it's sort of like, what are the logistics in your business that you or your team can take care of so that you have more happy clients and, an increasing number of them? That's sort of how I'm thinking along these lines. I also, again, I'm curious also, again, from where you started, because we titled this podcast around from roughneck to head of sales. So can you talk us briefly through the journey of how you got to be where you are?
Sure.
And in terms of, were you as a child someone that expected to accomplish big things? Were you always the one in your family that had the different ideas? Yeah. Or did this sort of come, or did this Dain, was that someone you got to know more once you, got into your 20s?
It's funny. My mom used to say that, she called me a poodle. I don't know why she called me a poodle. I don't know if it was a good description for me, but I guess, and I've never owned a poodle, so I'm not sure what that means. But it means that the way that she described it was that if I wanted something, I would get it. I would find a way to, get a way to accomplish what I wanted. And, I think growing up one of 7 kids, in that sort of chaotic environment where there's not a lot of direction, I felt like I, from a young age, had to determine where the edges of what I ought to be doing and what I shouldn't be doing. And I'm not saying I was a good kid. I would actually probably say I was the alternative. I was a little bit of I could get into trouble. I found myself enjoying sports and in competition. Sports are probably what helped me through much of my younger life. It kept me busy, and also it kind of helped create that drive of wanting to, I find myself now when we're looking at hiring people, that self-discipline that comes along with sports helps a lot. And coaches along the way oftentimes also served as parent figures or adult figures in my life to kind of help steer me in the right direction. I always knew that I was destined for something bigger than the small town that I grew up in. And not saying that life is a bad thing, but you kind of get, it's generation after generation that tends to stay in that small town. And I always felt like I had bigger things to do with my life. And so, I started working with my uncle, put myself through college, worked as a well driller, as a roughneck for 10 years as a well driller, basically, covered in mud, wearing Carhartt overalls every day, freezing, and in the hot sun in the summertime. And that really helped create the work ethic. And when I got to college, I was actually working there and I was putting myself through college. And I realized that many of my friends were going to college and were enjoying themselves and having a good time. And I always felt like I was at it, like I didn't get that same type of experience. And I always saw the nice cars that they drove and the great shirts and clothes that they wore. It always kind of motivated me. It was a little bit of a chip on my shoulder to accomplish that for myself. And I was always destined for my life to be different than the life that I had growing up.
Let me stop you for a second. So you said I always knew I was destined for something bigger than the small town I grew up in, and that may be a slight paraphrase.
Right.
How did you know you were always destined for something bigger?
I don't know. That's a great question. I just wanted to see more of the world. I felt like the world was bigger than that town. And I actually studied abroad in Sevilla, Spain. It's probably one of the most enlightening times of my life. I spent 3.5 months in Spain and learned Spanish. And I just, I don't know. That's a great question. I think some people are just inherently born with that drive, I think. I don't know. That's a great question.
Well, the drive piece maybe has to be addressed a different day. I don't know, because I agree that's a massive topic. Although I guess if we're talking sales, many would argue it's the most important topic. But I am just curious again, even for those parents listening, and I'm both parents.
Yeah.
Was it exposure to either things seeing a lot of things you didn't like, where that was reinforced to say this is not what I want for the rest of my life because it just inherently felt like it wasn't what you wanted, or was it somebody or where you were exposed to films or books by whomever, parents, your mother, teachers, that kind of exposed a different world to you, that sort of planted those seeds to say, ooh, that looks exciting to me, and it kind of stuck. I'm just curious. I mean, we may or may not answer the question.
It's a great question, and I don't know. I have 3 kids myself, and I'm trying to think like, how is it that I try to instill the same type of drive in them that I have? And, I'm still trying to figure that out, to tell you the truth. I don't know. I think the main thing is to find something that that they love, that they're passionate about, and try to push them towards what they want to accomplish. My wife does an amazing job at this. She's most involved in that. But there were opportunities at a young age to go to different, Washington, D.C. or travel, do road trips places. And I always was excited about that. I was always excited about seeing something different, seeing something new. I mean, one of the things that I want to try to say is, again, when my time's up, is that I gotta do the most amount of things and meet the most amount of people that I possibly could along the way. I think that's what really is the definition of a well-rounded individual: is how many people have you seen? How many places have you been? What have you witnessed? And that's what I'm trying to accomplish. I don't know how you instill that.
Yeah, it's interesting, and I must admit I 100% feel exactly the same way myself on that one. So I don't know if I'm a good judge of it either. What does ring a bell is a strengths finder test I took about 15 years ago, where they kind of broke out people into, 30 plus different categories, and you'd take their test and it would identify the top 5. And it basically said, these are the things that sort of one way or the other, as you grew up, you developed as your strongest strengths, often by the age of even 16, but pretty young. And one of those was something to do with, I can't remember if they called it connectedness or what, but it was somehow that again, one of the 32 or so character traits were people who just, one of the things they loved the most was finding the common ground between people from different walks of life and also different nationalities and ethnicities. That was something that brought them just more pleasure than what many people got. Again, because like all 32 were good character traits, but each of us was only like really, really strong in 5 of them. So just, I don't know if that's anywhere related. I don't know if that's helpful to anyone, but although it is an informative strengths finder test, it's something you can still take online.
Yeah.
One thing I'm curious about, though, when you talk about drive and your background, and I think this is a fundamental piece to this podcast, is, what I'm noticing is the people I'm interviewing that have accomplished remarkable things, many of them have been through some significant hard times, adversity, challenges, certainly nothing average. Right. And on one level, that's, it's all fascinating. But for the people that on some levels had a somewhat average upbringing or somewhat comfortable middle-class upbringing, where I'm going with this is I'm curious, you must have people like that on your sales team.
Yeah.
How do you coach them?
Yeah.
Either in terms of either with a drive piece or a tenacity piece, because maybe they didn't have, to grow up as fast as you did. How do you help people like that?
So I find that the same motivations around why people buy things are the same motivations as to why they want to create wealth or success in their own lives. It's the same motivation. It just presents itself in a different way. One is earning it, one is spending it. It's interesting. I have a very diverse group of individuals who work for me in terms of upbringing. But I, selling in this industry, it does help to find people that at times have traveled the world a little bit more. It's easier for them to relate to our consumer, and it was one of the disadvantages I had early on, but it became an advantage the longer I had done it. But one of the gentlemen that's on my sales team that actually comes from a very wealthy upbringing, and for him, he wants to find a way to be independently successful despite what his family situation really is. And I think it goes back to asking the same question around why. And you have to ask that question when it comes to employees. Why and what are you trying to accomplish? We had this gentleman named Marcel Brunel who did some sales training for us. And a lot of times I look at sales training as just really relationship training. And he positioned a question I thought was pretty interesting. He said, what would need to happen at the end of this year for us to both be happy with where you're at? Talking about the leader asking the employee. And what's revealed in that question is, what are the things that they want to accomplish? What do they want to accomplish? It's a safe space. It's a safe way to answer that question. And if you can't find out what your people that work with you, that you're lucky enough to have work with you, are the biggest reasons that they're there every day, what they're trying to accomplish, and oftentimes it's family driven. It's they want to make money because they want to be able to afford a certain type of life. And so a lot of it comes down to what type of life do they want to create for the people that they love most, right? Same drivers. It's the same drivers. And so it can't, once you find what those drivers are, you can't manipulate them. You can't use those things to your advantage and then not help them along the way. Does that make sense?
Not entirely, no.
You can be disingenuous when you ask the question. You could find out what motivates them, but you can never help somebody with what they're trying to accomplish. What's hard, the hard work comes from helping them see their goals, helping them see through what they said they were going to want to accomplish. What did they say is most important to them, and can you help them get there?
Can you talk us through a brief version of that conversation? And
Yes.
the reason why I'm asking you is because most of my experience in the last 17 years has been within financial services. And
Right.
most of the goal setting I've seen in those institutions and organizations is painful, quite frankly. In other words, the conversation goes something along the lines of, well, last year, Dain, you hit X amount. And so your goal for this upcoming year, forget about what you might want, is going to be higher than that because we expect more from you this year, regardless of what's going on in the economy and blah, blah, blah. And despite that bad publicity our bank recently had where somebody was embezzling money. No, I'm embellishing. But the point is it's almost never about the sales professional. It's always about the organization.
Yeah.
And it's almost always about numbers. It's nothing to do with, what kind of life would you like to create? And let's talk about that. So where I'm going with this is, how do you do that differently such that you see, I guess, positive outcomes most of the time?
Yeah. And a positive outcome could be, this isn't the right place for you to be successful with what you're trying to accomplish because of your capabilities or your desires or your production. That is a positive outcome. Helping somebody find that they're not in the right role or the right position or set up for success, or they should find something different to do, isn't a negative outcome. It oftentimes presents itself as a negative outcome because you might lose somebody who's helpful on your team, but it's actually a positive outcome. And again, you're helping somebody figure out what they're trying to accomplish. the way I did that, so the method that I always tried to have when I had direct performers, direct salespeople that worked for me, was that the beginning of the month meeting wasn't about you hitting your numbers. It was about how you felt about where you were progressing, what things were on your mind, and more about what was happening in their personal lives if they cared to share them. Now, there's a lot of people that don't really want to share that. And so, there are people that are a little bit more closed off, and that's okay. There's a lot of people that want to tell you things about what they're trying to accomplish, but you never ask. The person who is looked at as the leader never asks the hardest question, which is, what are you trying to accomplish here? What's most important to you in your life? Because their goals have less to do with the number you put in front of them and have more to do with what they're trying to accomplish. So if you can align what their personal goals are with the business goals, then you're much better off. Most people, there's a study that we learned in one of our executive meetings that oftentimes people leave jobs, they leave companies not knowing that there was more opportunity in front of them at that same company. Whose fault is that? Whose fault is it? Is it the fault of the employee who didn't speak up and say, I wish I would have been challenged more, I really want to move up? Or does the fault really rest more on the shoulders of the leader who never asked the most important questions?
It sounds like a loaded question. So do you tend to think it's on the organization? Because you could feel like you could go either way. Like
I do think it's on. Huh? I think it's more on the leader, and I think it's more on the organization. Mm-hmm. I do. It's difficult and it's scary to approach your job, to approach your boss and say you want more. Mm-hmm. It's intimidating. It's incredibly intimidating.
Yeah,
you don't know when to do it, how to do it. You set up time. You send an email, explain what you want to do. So how do you create that safe environment? And more importantly, as a leader, why wouldn't you want to know those things? If that is what's most going to drive that person to help you with what you're trying to accomplish as a leader, why would you not want to know the most important things that are happening in their life to get them to, to have a little bit more alignment about what you're going to do together? It's a partnership.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I think that the very answer to that is what you were just saying. Is I would say it's fear that people don't want to know because they're afraid that if you're working for me, and you say, well, and you talk about your goals, I'm thinking, that doesn't sound like a great fit. But then I think, but I don't want to lose Dain. Then I'm going to have to spend all this time hiring someone new, and then I got to train them. And so it's sort of fear-based or scarcity-based reasons, but it's certainly not reasons-based that elevate everybody. That's what's going through my head anyway. But what I do want to highlight though is your mindset, because if everybody managing a team or running a company had this, I guess, abundance mindset about win-win, then I can only imagine that generally speaking, good things are going to happen and it's all positive more or less most of the time. I mean, even for people that aren't a good fit, ultimately that has advantages so that you don't have demoralized, unhappy people with you, and maybe they go on and tell other people about, what a good place you are to work for, and that, maybe there's there's something good comes from that too. So, so in other words, it's the mindset that I'm taking away that you share that I think is the healthiest and the most productive that the rest of us can replicate. So I'm trying to say.
I hope so. I find it to be very helpful. So.
And then what do you do around accountability? Because what I've typically found with people, for any of us that want to get out of our own way, even on an individual level, maybe I should ask you first. I mean, who holds you accountable, or how has accountability helped you personally?
So
moving up the food chain.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm in charge of membership growth, and membership growth means business growth, because the more members you have in a membership club, the more business that you can generate it, the more renewals that you can have, the more bookings that can be made. So I feel like I'm one of the most accountable people that I know, and I'm accountable because also I'm accountable to my wife and my kids, and making sure that they have the things that are necessary in their lives. But I'm accountable to every employee here at the business. If I don't do my job well, and I don't think outside the box, and I don't challenge people, and I don't hold people accountable for the things that they ought to do, then I'm going to be in a world of pain. But I pride myself on making sure that as an organization, as a sales organization, that they understand that it isn't just about the sales team winning; it's about the company winning. because if the sales team falters and, for example, we can't do the things that we want to do for the rest of the employee base, we might lose other good employees that are doing great work in technology and HR and in finance. And so, that's big for me. And for the most part, it's my boss who holds me most accountable. My wife being one of my bosses, my other boss being the president of the company. But he does a good job of reminding me to think big picture.
How does your wife hold you accountable? I mean, are you being tongue-in-cheek here, or are there things she asks you about your own work responsibilities? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's it's doing the same things that you say you're going to do. Whether that's being home at a certain time or being present. It's really quite difficult these days to be present. I mean, for this call, I had to make sure that I shut my phone off and find an office that isn't in my office because, it's really hard to be present. I find myself oftentimes in multiple conversations in my head at the same time. So that's a big part of it is just being there, So
one of the things I want to ask you about, it's slightly different, except you just alluded to it, but you also alluded to it right at the beginning of this conversation about, you mentioned working hard, and then you said creativity, and just now you said, you kind of threw out there kind of thinking outside the box.
Yeah.
Can you give an example about something that, you think was kind of a creative idea that you've implemented into the work that you do?
Yeah, I mean, so we do these 360 reviews and they rank you based off of a lot of things. And one of them is, creativity, ingenuity. And that always ranks really high for me. I tend to think that you're never stagnant. You're either improving or you're getting slightly worse. And so with that mindset, I always feel like I need to put myself in a slightly uncomfortable situation. I always need to be pushing the limits a little bit within some guidelines, within some boundary. And in the position that I'm in, we have to be challenging the status quo. We're a club in an industry that we are by far the most successful club that's ever been in this industry, and we're starting to really apply to people that like to use travel agents, like to use that use group travel options for people that want to do weddings afar. Those are things that we do. We charter a dozen different cruise ships a year. We operate a portfolio of $1 billion. We can book any hotel that you might want to book. And so while the business is constantly innovating, I need to constantly be innovating about what products that we sell and how we position things. So I'll give you an example. Just yesterday, we launched new membership pricing. It's the same cost to join the club, but it's broken up in a way where it's much more attainable to the consumer. Not too different than the way that Peloton sells treadmills, not too different than the way that Tesla sells cars, and not too different than the way that Apple sells iPhones. And that change has been something that has been 2.5 years in the making. For 2.5 years, we've been trying to get to this point. We finally got to it just yesterday. But a couple of, there's those types of ideas all the time where it seems like it's a big change before you do it, but after it's implemented, you wonder why it was ever different in the first place. And here's the thing about good ideas. Good ideas are never original ideas. They're usually a spinoff of somebody else's idea, one. And a good idea is only a good idea if it gets better with time. If it gets worse with time, it's actually a bad idea.
And then are there things you do that encourage your creativity? Like, I don't know, that just give your mind a chance to be creative? Tips?
Yeah, I like to listen to certain podcasts. I've always been attracted more to people that are comedians than necessarily thought leaders and in business. I feel like humor is a way to connect with somebody on a level that's at a different level than just us agreeing on something. If we both laugh about something, there's automatic understanding. There's automatic shared experience. I think about comedians oftentimes having to be super creative, because if they don't have good material, it's not going to be. And I'm not going to sit here and say for 1 second that I'm actually a funny person. I'm actually not very funny at all. But I find that I used to enjoy watching George Carlin growing up, and his masterful use of the English language. It wasn't necessarily what he said that I always agreed with or disagreed with. It's the words that he put together, and the thoughts that he put together that I thought were so compelling for me. But obviously I love reading. I try to do my own writing. I try to set my own goals. It's big for me every year. We do this thing where every year we go down to Cabo, and first of the year we sit around we call it the chimenea, and everybody from my 4-year-old daughter who wants to talk about what she wants to accomplish in life, to everything to my father-in-law who's been successful throughout his life, talks about the things that are important to him. And I do think it's important to verbalize what is it that you want to accomplish, because if you can verbalize those things, there's a much better chance that the world actually works in your favor and they get done. Mm-hmm. So
that's awesome. That's really interesting. What I'm taking from this is that all of us would benefit from doing something where we're generating ideas from different or unexpected places that just sort of help us increase our awareness about great ideas and what's possible. I mean, even just your idea about the pricing, but you borrowed it from best practices in completely different industries, and that's precisely where the best ideas usually come from in one industry, is they borrowed it or stole it from a different one, but not typically from within their own industry. So I just find that very fascinating. So I know we need to wrap up here. So 3 quick questions just to sort of wrap things up. So I guess my first one is I guess since your oil or your well drilling days, who would you say you've become?
Who have I become? Oh, that's a great question. I feel like I've become a thought leader in this industry. That's who I feel like I've become. If I think there's something that I can hang my hat on for the next 10, 20, 30 years, it isn't just being a sales leader. It isn't just being an effective sales manager. It's being a thought leader. To me, I feel like that's one of the ultimate achievements, is when people look at your thoughts and your advice and it matters, it's meaningful. I think it's one of the things that I was trying to achieve when I first got into sales in the first place. I just wanted to hang in conversations. I wanted to have an opinion that mattered. And that's really what I want at the end of the day. I want an opinion that matters.
Fascinating. And then what would be a good first step for people to, I guess, to be more effective in their sales role? If you were to, you've mentioned many different things. What do you think the first one is for people?
I think it comes down to what it is that drives them. What can they find deep down inside? What is their rudder? What is the thing that's propelling them through life? A. And B, if you don't like what you're doing, if you don't like the position that you're in, it's a lot easier to go out on top than it is to go out on the bottom. Become skilled and masterful at the practice of what you're doing today, and then try to move. But find the thing that you love most, and that's not always easy. You can't just change. You can't just pick up and say, well, tomorrow I'm gonna stop doing this because I love doing that. Become really good at what you're doing, and it'll create a platform for what you want to accomplish next.
That's awesome. And then lastly, how can people keep in touch with you, and anything else you want to share about Inspirato before we finish?
Absolutely. So I do have a Twitter handle that I try to post as much as I possibly can, just mainly about our club and the exciting developments. It's at DainRasmussen.com.
Can you spell? Yeah, do spell your name for people, please.
Dain, like rain with a D, D-A-I-N, and then Rasmussen. It's one S at the beginning and 2 S's at the end. So it's R-A-S as in Sam, M as in Mary, U, S as in Sam, S as in Sam, E, N as in Nancy.
Brilliant. Okay. And to just Twitter or anywhere else, any websites?
Twitter, obviously, if you just watch the success of Inspirato, which is www.inspirato.com, that's what I'm most passionate about. So if you watched those 2 things, I think you'd have a pretty good handle on as to what I have going on in my life. So
Excellent. And then anything else you wanted to share about the Inspirato?
Other than it's a fantastic way to spend time with people that you care about most, not necessarily.
Okay, brilliant. Well, thank you. No, this has been a fascinating journey, I think, in terms of not just growing in sales, but around, managing other people and focusing, in my mind, on what, basing it. I mean, actually, ironically, basing the sale around what matters most to people, but then also to effectively work with others in a work setting to start with what matters most to them and building goals around that, and certainly hoping it's then a good fit for the environment, but that if it isn't, it's in nobody's interest that people stay put either way. And I mean, really having the courage to ask more powerful, engaging questions that are, based on what people feel, what their feelings around and what they care most about. But then also some other great tips I think that have been useful in terms of, how I would define innovation. I think all of us could probably be growing our own businesses more by being more innovative and doing something there where we're drawing different ideas or being open to different ideas from different sources. I think that's another big deal too, as far as I can tell. So anyway, Dain, thank you so much for your time. And this has been really, really, really interesting for the listeners. Pick something that's come up that would be a good first step for you, whether it's doing that inner work about what drives you deeply, or whether it's something more practical about coming up with some, frankly, better questions, more engaging questions would be, 2 immediate places to start. Otherwise, I'm going to wrap things up here. So thanks again. All show notes are going to be on the website, matt-anderson.com, matt-anderson.com. Otherwise, subscribe to the podcast if you haven't already, and please leave a review. That's always much appreciated. Otherwise, I'll leave with my favorite question, which is, what would you do if you knew you couldn't fail? I'm Matt Anderson, and this was The Road Not Taken.